Thank you for joining. I'm glad you're able to take the time here this morning. Appreciate this opportunity to have some great panelists to share share their insight and perspective. Today we have four special guests who will share with us their experience guiding entrepreneurial ventures through the coronavirus and supporting business communities in the goal to create sustainable small business ventures. So joining us today is Dell Gines, the Senior Community Development Advisor for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, the Omaha branch. Also joining us today is the founding CEO of the Grow Nebraska Foundation, Janelle Anderson Erke. And Janelle has led the organization since 1995. It's great to see the growth of her organization there. Next is Andrew Verbos, CEO and founder of Pacha Soap in Hastings. And his company was inspired by a service trip to Peru, actually, as a junior at Hastings College in 2013. It's great to see his company grow too. His footprint is around the globe. Finally is Kevin Griffith, the founder and CEO of Amplify Capital. Kevin holds an MBA, CPA, and a Juris Doctorate. He is a subject matter specialist in financial management and strategic planning. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, our economy was at record highs, as you know, and businesses, small and large, were really prospering. Now, due to unforeseen circumstances, our communities are faced with significant obstacles, but we know it will be our small businesses which bring us back. So efforts such as the Paycheck Protection Program created by the CARES Act have saved over 51 million jobs, according to the Small Business Administration. While programs such as the PPP have been able to help many small businesses stay afloat during the pandemic, it is the knowledge and hard work of our employers and workforce which have made a huge difference in our economic comeback and our communities. In order to help small business owners further, today's panel will focus on one of the issues I deal with daily in my work on the Ways and Means Committee as a whole, and that's small business growth. Thank you everyone again for participating. I'd like to begin by providing each of you with the opportunity to share your perspective on how you've navigated the coronavirus and how you or your organization supports your clients or customers with the goal of sustaining or growing your business throughout and beyond the pandemic. Mr. Gines, so would you like to begin?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, Congressman Smith. It's always
thank you.
Great to stay in Nebraska and chat about Nebraska since I'm from Nebraska. I'm from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City here at our Omaha branch. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that, it's a central bank of the United States. So we're responsible for monetary policy. My specific focus is community development, where I focus on small business and economic development, primarily focusing on entrepreneurship ecosystem building. And I think that's probably where most of you that are watching or will watch will recognize me, for across the state of Nebraska. And so, as you may suspect, monetary policy has been a pretty big deal during this time. We've effectively lowered the interest rates to zero in terms of trying to help stimulate the economy during the recession. And then also we've launched the Main Street Lending Program to kind of support, banks as they do their lending process. But more specifically, what I've been working on is to try to help communities work. Well, first of all, to understand what's going on during the pandemic, especially with our small businesses, and then to prepare strategy for the recovery for our small businesses. And so we've really been working diligently on gathering information, sharing it with our president, Esther George, so she can be present virtually in Washington to make monetary policy decisions. And this is really important because what happens in New York and what New Yorkers are experiencing is not the same as what's happening in McCook, Nebraska, which is one of my favorite towns outside of Omaha. So we tried to be as diligent as possible in gathering information from a wide variety of folks and sharing it with Esther, and then also trying to communicate out to our communities things like what's going on with the PPP or EIDL or other stimulus funds that are available, trying to continue to gain insight so that we can share publicly with what our small business stakeholders are facing. Because relatively speaking, while this is really a public health and a small business pandemic, when you compare it to kind of 2008 and 2000-ish recession, there wasn't that much energy around the small business sector. This has been front and center. But what it's shown us is that we have a huge gap in our entrepreneurship ecosystem across the United States and in Nebraska in particular. And this is something that people have been working to address. So I've been on the Blueprint Nebraska Small Business Committee, and we've tried to extend that into the Nebraska Builders, work group that's designed to build a better ecosystem in the state of Nebraska. So we've been working on that. It's been going slow, but we're still working on that process. And then we've released a guide. Well, we will be releasing a guide and doing substantial outreach over the next 12 months called the Small Business Owners of Color Recovery Guide. Because while it's impacted our entrepreneurs across the nation significantly, it's attacked our entrepreneurs of color even more so, with early stage projections, even though it goes up and down based upon the impact of the stimulus and opening and closing of the economy, that 42% of all African American businesses across the nation closed, roughly 30% of immigrants and Hispanics, almost 20% of white businesses, and right around 20 to 30% for women-owned businesses as well. So we have a strategy of outreach to kind of help create what is called recovery communities, to kind of organize their local ecosystems to kind of address the needs during the recovery. And then we're still really supporting the entrepreneurship ecosystem building methodology to try to be able to and I'll give you just as a great example. So if we look at our neighbors in Kansas, they have a phenomenal program some of you recognize called Network Kansas. It's an entrepreneurship ecosystem building model that was passed through state legislation back in 2004, the Kansas Growth Act, launched in 2007. Now they're in 66 counties, with the exception of one, it's all rural. It allows communities to self-organize around access to capital, connecting the dots with their other peer group stakeholders and financial institutions and entrepreneurs. And I would really like to see something like that in Nebraska, even if it's not the same program conceptually. And we already have a lot of other things that are working. So with that, I'll turn it over to other folks. And when we have Q&A, if we get to that point, we can talk a little bit more about it.
Sure. Thank you, Del. Janelle, what can you tell us this morning? Thanks again for joining us and appreciate your perspective. Take it away.
Thanks, Congressman Smith. It's always a pleasure to be in part of one of your panels. I feel very humbled. There's a lot of great information. What we've really been thriving to do with the Nebraska small businesses that we have the pleasure to work with is get them to digitally pivot. What's their digital footprint? It's been interesting as we're helping businesses transition to a complete, or at least have an online presence. It's a new normal that we need to do things like what we're doing here. The face-to-face networking is, right now something that's definitely on pause. And how do we help businesses develop clients and contactless payments, curbside pickup? We're very happy that Grow Nebraska has established a very strong relationship with Google. I'm going to, probably tout this till the day I die. You need to make sure Google loves your business. I would have named my daughter that if I would have known what I know now. It is so important that we are a high impact gold partner. We're the only organization in the state of Nebraska. And so we do a lot of training on Google. A lot of people are like, well, why is my Google map so important? Well, now more than ever, your SEO and to have a Google love you and have an Apple map and all these wonderful things that get in your wheelhouse, and also having multiple channels of e-commerce, how people can find you. We were thrilled. The businesses that we had the opportunity to work with, especially I did some stats on 3rd District, their sales during Corona on online were up 150%. Now, I only wish that we could have done more, and we're working very hard right now in the communities. Right now, we have a project in Alliance, Sydney, and McCook. But how do we get businesses to make that transition so that they can thrive and survive when they're not able to have customers come in? So we're really working on developing a number of strategies, helping them connect. with other organizations, making sure they have strong business plans, obviously, so they can get financing. But, you know, we're also working on the, you know, the Facebook ads, the algorithms. We're doing 2 webinars that are open to the public, always the 3rd and 4th Thursday of the month. I'm going to be honest, I'm a little zoomed out and webinared out. Everyone's kind of shaking their head, but we've got to get, knowledge is power. And now more than ever, we've got to get our small businesses that knowledge and power. We're ramping up for one of our most successful holiday seasons for a number for the small businesses. And it's going to be tough. I mean, we're competing. Everybody's moved to an online presence. And so now more than ever, you know, having your Google AdWords in place, we're doing a lot of work with that. So I guess at the end of the day, Congressman, we're just really working on how do we get businesses to digitally pivot or have an extremely strong digital footprint. So that way, if they search something, Nebraska businesses come on top. And that's not easy, but we're going to keep working on it.
Good. Very good. Thank you, Janelle. Andrew Verboss, your thoughts?
You need to unmute yourself, Andrew.
Thanks. Thanks, Congressman Smith. I don't have a lot to say. I guess I just go over our experience and what happened and maybe some of the things that we did. But
sure.
For us, a lot of our business was wholesale in retail. So when retail stores were shutting down, we had to really stick to core products and also look at other products to get into. So we got into some different products that people were obviously looking for, like hand sanitizer. So that was a help to pivot to new categories, some of which will stay in for the long period. And I think just maybe more of a soft action that we took was communicating that this is going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. We're going to all get through this, and providing some positivity. Like we had a campaign called We Got This that was good for everybody to be part of, to just show that we're going to survive this as a business. We're going to survive this as a country. And we saw a lot of our consumers appreciate that message in a time that was really scary. So when it flipped to be really hard and difficult and uncertain, I think just providing a message of, yes, it is, but we are Americans. We have gotten through, we've gotten through this as a nation before. We'll get through it again. And so it's almost just providing a path forward. And then you, whenever that's communicated to your team or every part of your company or even your consumers, then it kind of frees up the imagination to solve the problems. But I echo what Janelle said. Obviously, we see a huge shift towards online. So there's tactile things that we're able to do. But just from a soft perspective, I think that really helped.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Thank you, Andrew. And Kevin Griffith.
I'm not sure I'm gonna have much to add. We saw a lot of businesses pivot to digital. We saw capital markets contract, so the government programs were very helpful with that. You know, a lot of uncertainty, and so it was very much a day-by-day thing. You had both a revenue problem, you had cost problems, you had to retool factories so that they were safe for workers to go in. Very much a day-to-day type thing. And like Andrew said, just constantly reminding people, you know, there's an end to this. We'll get through it. And so that's really where our focus has been. That and one other thing would be the remote workforces, trying to understand those business models, how that works. A lot of businesses that had invested in information technology structure and had good partners, they were able to pivot pretty quick on that.
Very good. Very good. Well, we'll certainly open it up to questions. And while folks are thinking about their questions, I have some questions. Dale, I was wondering how much you're hearing about workforce issues, workforce availability. And obviously we've got this balancing act that's hard to accomplish with some unemployment, and also what I'm told is high demand for employees, especially on supply chains and so forth. Del, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously every industry hasn't been impacted equally. So you still hear the huge shortage in skilled labor, which was a pre-COVID challenge we know that we faced in Nebraska too. So you're looking at, things like construction workers, truck drivers, things of that nature that are still there. And you still see some of the other industries that were in high demand that were there. Obviously, healthcare. I mean, it goes without saying. It's really is industry specific. One of the biggest challenges we have in a lot of Nebraska is actually underemployment. And I think, as we see the unemployment rate continue to decrease based upon the opening or closing of the economy, that's still going to be present. And so, trying to figure out, this is such a unique and weird time. I mean, I guess that's the only way you can put it, because it's throwing off any of the things that were used to be consistent and making it inconsistent. So by and large, though, in your historical industries that we've seen shortages, that you're still seeing them, and in certain industries that were significantly more impacted by COVID. And of course, you look at some of your industries like restaurants and others that have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Things like salons, things require in-person, hands-on, have been impacted. And so I think what we really need to do, and I'm so appreciative of the individuals who've said, we can weather this, we're Nebraskans, we can deal with this, and we'll come on the other side. But I think while we're doing it, we really need to broaden out our look at how our workforce is being impacted, how our small businesses are being impacted, and start planning now, because we have a dual track pathway we have to consider, which is how do we end up, making sure that our small businesses recover in a healthy way and actually do better, because Nebraska has always been middle or low to the pack in entrepreneurship. And then simultaneously, how do we look at our workforce needs and continue to say, okay, well, we still have these deficit gaps in skilled labor, CDL, et cetera, but we also have this huge, group that we're going to have to figure out how to redeploy into the labor market based upon what happened in the pandemic. And so to me, this requires Nebraskans to come together, especially those who are in these fields, and really put our noodles together and say, okay, we know we still have to deal with the pandemic today. It's still here, it's still real, it's still increasing. I think I read we had another record number recently. But while we know that it's going to end, so what do we need to do to ensure that Nebraska is positioned to be the most competitive that it possibly can be coming out of the virus? And that's kind of where I'd like to see some of the conversations pivot to.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Janelle, when you say pivot to technology and an online presence, I'm just wondering what is generally required for, say a business that doesn't have as much online as there would be capacity for, and what does it take for them to kind of transition into that, like cost wise or even labor, and then if you might even toss out some examples.
Absolutely. I think the first thing, Congressman Smith, when we really work with the businesses, we're developing their digital game plan. Do they have a website? A lot of businesses will say, well, I have a Facebook business page. Great. But at the end of the day, you still need to have your 24/7, your web page, and you need to make sure that you're using really strong meta tags, key search words. Can people find you? The most wonderful thing that's happened with technology is now through WordPress, Wiki, back you had to bring up 1995 when I started. I'm kind of a dinosaur. Websites were thousands of dollars, back in the day. But now through technology, you can get a pretty decent, we call it a brochure website. And it's not very simple, it's not very sophisticated, but it does a nice job, tells the story. Obviously now the key thing with digital pivoting is you've got to be able to tell a story through photos, and people don't want to Gone with the Wind novel, but telling your story, that you're real. And people love the fact that I feel sometimes that COVID's given our small businesses an advantage. People love to support small businesses and know they're real. And so we're really working with, are you telling a really good story? So obviously that website's really important. Here's an example of a digital pivot. So Dorothy Lynch, most of us know Dorothy Lynch, okay? So they had not online presence. And so they came to us and said, we want to create an online presence. We know that our clientele is, Janelle, sort of your age, 50-ish and up. People are those are the people. Otherwise, we're competing with a younger crowd that loves ranch. So if you go to Dorothy Lynch's website, you'll see that they've added a purchase or buy button, and it goes to our Amazon listings that we're designing. We also work, and they're a large company, so they are working with a marketing firm, Swanson and Russell, or our Buy Nebraska site. So I tell businesses, pretty affordable, we can do what we call a collection page, where it actually clicks to our Shopify site. And if you take a look at Pacha, soap company, has a beautiful Shopify site. Andrew, high five. We take a look at your site and use it as an example all the time. I do think you have to have a Facebook presence. We would do a lot of work with Facebook, and then that Google map now, again, I'm going to go keep saying, you've got to love Google. You can put events on Google. Last month, our Buy Nebraska store had over 50,000 views of photos of our Nebraska businesses that we reciprocally then link to an e-commerce site. It's building a brand, but, I tell people we've got 50,000 views off our Google map, and they're like, wow, Janelle, but I'm like, we have 247 photos on our Google map, okay? 247 pictures on our Google map. We add photos to our Google map each and every week. The other thing, Congressman, I'm going to say is, creating a strong digital footprint is something that has to be done intentionally and consistently. So there is some expense, because some time, but you've got to reinvent yourself. And once you get into the habit, like for example, my job is every day I go in and I look at our Twitter page and I retweet, and I'm that's my job. It takes me about 10 minutes, about the same time it takes me to brush my teeth. Obviously, I've got another team working on our Facebook, and now there's TikTok. We're doing some things on that. But most small businesses, I'm telling them, we're also seeing some great success on Pinterest, but, get on a couple things, have a strong website. Generally, Facebook is where most of our clients are at this point, and figure out, have numerous, channels for e-commerce. We're also spending a ton of time, I'm going to say you need to love Google, but the other one we got to love, which is a big beast, it's called Amazon. Okay. We're not going to get away from Amazon. Right. And so if you can, and we offer UPCs, we need to get as many of our Nebraska products on Amazon. And then, that brings in a whole new structure, because these sites aren't free, but, so it's hard to know what to tell you what a range of expense, but it's definitely needs to be part of that business plan and part of that financial needs of making sure you put in money for your digital marketing, because I think it's everything. And I think at the end of the day, if business wraps their arms around it, it gives us a true advantage. We've got an eyelash company that does magnetic eyelashes in the wonderful town of Alliance, Nebraska, and she's doing some phenomenal stuff with her Shopify site, because she's she's finding her niche and doing some great things. So I don't know if that really answered your question, Congressman, but I think that sort of gives you an idea.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And, it has been interesting, just personally speaking, as my family and I, we've been here in Western Nebraska since March, with a few exceptions of heading to DC for votes and so forth. But obviously, our personal habits are much more digital, related to, finding stuff online. Here locally, it's the curbside service at Target, I think, has really enabled them to compete against, say Amazon that does things a little differently. It's just been fascinating. Now I've noticed where our entrepreneurs are selling beef and pork online, huge opportunity. They've been selling out, obviously. They probably have more capacity to sell product than they can supply. And so we're trying to work on that from the federal policy standpoint of what can we do to empower these smaller processors to be able to meet the needs and fill orders. And so it's, as you can imagine, it's no easy task, especially when you're talking about food safety and, all of a sudden a huge demand. And I really appreciate the entrepreneurial aspects of these operations who, they're cranking things out, and it's quite impressive. Kevin, I wanted to ask you what you think of, kind of where the federal government has helped financially in the business sector, and what gaps, and actually this is for the entire panel, what gaps do you think remain? I mean, we've seen some proposals for relief out of Washington that, just went, I think went far beyond what they needed to. We need to be bold, certainly, but I was just wondering what kind of gaps you're seeing. Now, I've talked to a PPP recipient. I'm very grateful for what they needed, and it's not that things have gotten easy all of a sudden either. But they said the next round they won't need that. And so, their needs are going to be in other areas, COVID impacted. But I was just wondering what gaps you think there are that we should look at in Washington.
Sure. Well, I think to start off, where we started, the PPP program was a big help. The EDIL programs were also very big helps. Fed actions were incredibly helpful just to ease uncertainty, right? In terms of finance, panics are huge problems. And so the quick actions that happened, when the pandemic hit across the board, really put people in it put them in a position where, like, okay, if somebody can help me bridge the next 3 months, I can figure out what to do. That's really what was the problem that we were facing a lot was, where did this come from? And now all of a sudden, everything that we were planning is gone and we need time. And so that's what that PPP really enabled. I think, as Del mentioned earlier, it's by industry. The housing market, the housing sector really hasn't seen a slowdown, and that's a huge driver of the economy. The commodity prices are depressed, so that's going to have impact on your agricultural companies, agricultural-based companies, oil-based companies, things like that. So I think and then obviously your service businesses, anything retail is slowed down tremendously. And so I think, there's something like 100 million people employed in the service business. I'm not sure what it is in Nebraska. That's really where I think the focus should be. I think your more B2B, larger companies are probably going to weather it okay. And I think capital markets are starting to calm down, especially for that group. So I would say the gap still looks to be, those service businesses and making sure the really small, call it 10 and under employees, have that financial backstop, because they don't have 2 weeks of cash in the balance sheet. And so that's really where I think the focus should be going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Others? Anyone else? Looking at, and obviously I wouldn't choose for us to be in the middle of this pandemic, obviously. I am fascinated, though, to see what we can take from it, whether it's federal policy, whether it's, where some entrepreneurs have stepped in and really filled a gap, filled a need that's out there. And so with every new day, there's more data. And so I hope that we can see data that is available for entrepreneurs to sort through. If any of you see things that you'd like more information on, please let us know. That's certainly appropriate for us to share from the federal government. I just think there are opportunities for us to find a lot of instruction, whether, like I said, whether it's, federal policy or economic strategies and so forth. I think we can be stronger for it, as painful as it is going through this. And talking to airline pilots who are furloughed, that's obviously a problem. I think there are some parts of our economy that we had taken for granted. And it's going to take some time, even under very positive circumstances. It will take some time for things to realign. I think if one thing we want to make sure is that we get at the federal level, we get our unemployment policy right. A one size fits all approach, I don't think is the answer. That's certainly what I'm hearing from small businesses across Nebraska. They would prefer Nebraska not have the same type of thing as New York and California. And so some of that has expired, but there's a huge push by the speaker to go back to the $600 a week bonus or enhancement above and beyond state unemployment compensation. And so that I know that concerns a lot of Nebraska employers. And like I said, we want there to be relief in a good way, in a smart way that actually doesn't build barriers to getting our economy back on track. So anything anyone want to add to that or disagree too? That's okay.
Well, and again, this is my personal opinion, not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve banker system. Sure. One of the things I think worked really well was the expansion of unemployment benefits to small business owners. Like that's historically been a very challenging thing for small business owners. And I think during the pandemic, that's been useful. And I think it'll actually end up saving a lot of small businesses. So my wife owns a small fitness studio and fitness training facility. And immediately all of that business was shut down during the pandemic. And so her ability to go out and, get unemployment benefits for that, which if memory serves me correctly, may have been one of the first times that was available for the small business owner, was a significant thing. Obviously, you have to use intelligence, when you apply these strategies, because like you said, Congressman, the ultimate objective is to, restore strength in the economy, restore balance in the economy, and restore good quality growth in the economy and in Nebraska specifically in this conversation. But, speaking about it from the entrepreneurship lens, I think a few things that we've seen is that PPP and EIDL has worked. I mean, it's not without hiccups. We know that there's challenges with how the funds were distributed across diverse, industries, business sizes, and populations. But on net, we've heard a lot of benefit from that, the EIDL program. And it raises the question of, going forward, can we look at more forms of intelligent capital flexibility for small business owners? We know that continually we're seeing these gaps in the credit marketplace between traditional banking, microfinancing. Nebraska would do well to beef up their angel investment, their venture capital. It would do well to look at alternative and scaling up microfinance and CDFI-based lending and other forms of lending, both, as we're going through the pandemic and also when we recover, because, capital is the lifeblood of businesses. So I think if anything, if there's a silver lining in any of this crazy pandemic stuff, is that it's shown us that we can do things differently. Like Janelle was referencing, like some of the other business owners were referencing, there's ways that we can look at the world differently in terms of our business, the way that we organize our financial institutions and processes, and the way that we organize ourselves. and hopefully some of the positive lessons that we learn can carry through and scale so we can make Nebraska healthy and stronger.
Yeah, it's interesting. My wife and I, we opened a small Airbnb behind our house here in Gearing last winter. So right before COVID hit, and we'd started to build up some reservations. Well, COVID hit, wiped out almost all of the reservations. And, you know, I felt a little bit sorry for ourselves, but I also thought there's a lot more pain elsewhere. So we're not so bad off. And literally just when things started to reopen, I mean, that thing filled up and is still full today. And I mean, just a lot of activity. We had folks from Colorado because Colorado was still shut down longer than Nebraska was. So they had cabin fever. They wanted to come up. We had folks you basically telecommute for a week, you know, who drove up here from Denver. So my point is that, you know, there's this desire, you know, by consumers to just keep going, to perhaps even go more than they would have otherwise. And so I think there can be some economic opportunity through that process as well. I'm curious on our panelists, what you might have seen over the last several months that you were kind of surprised when you first saw it, but now when you think about it, it's going to continue, that you never thought would have happened. Anything come to mind for any of you? It's anyone there?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we had been long seeing shift to consumer buying patterns to online. This certainly accelerated it. One thing that was interesting that I thought, you know, had Amazon, you know, been growing quite fast, and online retail is about 10% of the retail market. I'm not sure what it is now, but you saw Walmart, Target, other retailers compete quite well online and offer different business models. And I think, you know, the way the consumer shops, both online and then in person, I think will continue to evolve because of this. And we'll see how. I think now, you know, we're kind of in this fatigue phase of the pandemic, and you know, the question to me is like, will we revert to old behaviors, or will there be some kind of permanent change going forward? And that I'm not sure.
Andrew, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to mention the click and pick that Kevin's talking about. That surprised me. So people buy online and then pick up at curbside. It was kind of niche, but then the numbers came back from Walmart and Target that Kevin shared with me, and it was just far and away growing like crazy. And I don't know, I guess we think about that a lot, where online, there was always this push for online even prior to the pandemic. But we look at it, and a lot of people lose a lot of money trying to market online because they just pour money into ads, and maybe they don't get the return if they don't watch it carefully. So we're always proponent of having that omni-channel strategy of brick and mortar and online, and how do they work together. But click and pick is not really brick and mortar, and it's not really online, it's a hybrid. And so, and people shop click and pick differently than they shop e-commerce, and differently than they shop brick and mortar. So it's almost like a new channel. And I think, of course, big CPG is going to master it and have already done really well to understand how people shop that differently. But it's a new, in some ways, it will bring in like a new psychological element for how people shop. And it'll be interesting to see, do people want to keep that going, or are they tired of getting brown bananas, so they really want to go in and see what their bananas are like? That's the question, I guess, that we have a lot.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Anyone else on that topic?
Congressman, I was just going to say, how important video became, and online payment portals, you know, obviously even like Alliance Rec Center. We were helping a number of traditional service businesses set up YouTube channels, Facebook Live sessions, to really, and they pivoted really well. And, you know, were able to maintain and actually grow their customer base, even a couple insurance agencies, you know. So and I really feel strongly that that will continue, and people will realize that this is the new median, because, you know, if we look at our buying population, you know, the younger generation, a lot of them don't even have TV. So now everything that we can do that's, you know, through, you know, different other channels than our traditional media, even though that's important, is, and Andrew brought up a really good point. We have to continue to really stress that businesses are watching their margins and as their sales volume. You know, we're doing a lot of, you know, interesting work, I feel, in with Facebook ads and Google ads, but at the end of the day, you have to really watch other numbers there. Even our e-commerce emails, you know, are we getting return? Because there's costs associated with all that. So really sitting down and knowing your numbers now, I think is more important than ever before.
Mhm.
I would add, Congressman, you know, what we're doing today, like I've spoken at over 30 different conferences around the nation and since COVID began, some in places I would never ever be had it not been for the pandemic. People, it was about a lag of about probably a month, and then everybody said, wow, we can do this stuff online. We don't have to organize in person, have all this travel costs and these big events. And we can get speakers from all across the world to come and speak at these events. And I think a lot of that is going to change, or is going to stay there. I think you just cannot, like, this would have been a much richer experience in person, just because we would have been able to see each other and hang out, and then the conversations that we would have, you know, on break or before or after, which you can't really replace via Zoom. But in terms of actually getting out and having these kind of things now has become easier because it's so easy. So I think that's going to more people with a lot of long pandemic. So we got to get Jared's beard going post pandemic, and have do some other things where I think people's, you know, suit patterns are going to change, right? Like I haven't worn a suit since the pandemic started, and God willing, that's gonna be a new norm. Like the questions of professionality, like, you know, and I'm joking about it, but these things are really things I think about that have changed as we're doing things like this from our basement, as we're figuring out different ways to connect with each other. And last point on this, I think it's awesome for Nebraska that we're going to a more virtually connected world, because it gives us an opportunity to build new relationships with people across the state that is now no longer siloed in the Omaha, Lincoln, Western Nebraska dichotomy. So I think that's a great thing, and I hope Nebraska continues to embrace it as we build bridges from right to left, and north to south. So that's my fingers crossed, optimistic, you know, ambition coming out of the pandemic.
Now we did have someone, Adele, weigh in that says they follow your Facebook, and you've offered information on how your suits fit on Facebook. Now, I
Yeah, that's my good friend Jason Toller. You know, like that's a good point. I probably don't wear suits because I gained that COVID-19. So, you know, maybe it's just me wishing we don't have to go back to suits because I won't be able to fit them after the crisis.
Yeah. Well, you know, it has been interesting, just whether it's with my job and studying numbers and hearing from constituents and various folks out there. As was mentioned, you know, the housing economy has remained strong, despite the fact that, you know, the labor can be difficult, was difficult beforehand as well, as was noted. Building materials, very expensive these days. And so, you know, I'm constantly wondering, you know, how long does this last? What's next? Talk to car dealers who can't get the inventory. they feel they need to sell and can sell. Just supply chains in general. It started out with supply chains relating to the personal protective equipment. And, now we hear concerns about supply chains literally across the board. I mean, the shortage of kitchen appliances. And that's a reflection of the supply chain challenge as well. While that's a challenge, yes, I also see that as an opportunity, though, for the American economy, because I think we have better policies in place now as it relates to trade. I think that we're much better positioned now, especially with our tax policy than we were before, with more competitive tax policy to keep companies in the U.S. rather than fleeing to lower tax jurisdictions like they were before our tax action in Washington. So I just think that there are some aspects here that we can be well poised to get back on track more quickly than we would have otherwise. What else? Anyone else want to comment on Dell's Facebook exchanges? No, just teasing. Janelle,
Well,
let's go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm glad that Nebraska stayed open for the most part, and you're seeing a mass exodus out of states like California because people really weren't able to work from the state laws. So, it's really an advantage, and I have more and more people not thinking it's so crazy that we're in Nebraska now, so that's good. So for states like ours, it's I'm appreciative of how things have been handled for the most part from a business perspective.
Yeah, good. Broadband access. Janelle, do you come across many of your members who just don't have the access that they need or that they feel that they would want to expand and grow?
Congressman, that's an excellent question. I have to say that I really feel that Nebraska has really worked hard on that topic. I think there are some pockets that are still, like even in the little town of Wilsonville, it's only about 30 miles away from me. There's some places that you can't get cell service. Obviously, we've done some really good work there with their internet, but I'm not seeing that much with the over 400 businesses that we work with. Most of them have come up with solutions. I mean, and I want to applaud. I think our internet providers in Nebraska are doing a pretty decent job, which gives us another, total advantage, being where we're located. And I'm going to say that I have to echo Andrew's point. I was really glad that Nebraska was fairly good about letting our small businesses stay open and keep things rolling, because there's a lot of small businesses that was the only reason that they were able to keep going. And I'm really hoping that this next wave, we've really worked hard, but we have to continue to work hard. Shutting them down is going to be tough, as you know. I mean, it's just going to be tough. And I think the other thing is, having both, now we need to look at a model that's both brick and mortar and an online presence. And if a business can wrap their arms around that and hopefully have, like you said, good broadband, they can get it done, but it's, so I'm not seeing that. A lot of people ask me that, but we've always done almost everything because the foundation hasn't had a budget. So we've always had an online newsletter, and we didn't do a lot of print. And so, and we've had a, you know, website since 1998. So you know, I'm not, but again, I'm sure there are areas that could be improved, but overall, I think I'd give us a pretty good score in Nebraska.
That's good. Good to hear. I'm always wanting to stay ahead of that curve there, because, mere access is one thing, capacity can be another. That, if a family, say, had internet access before and they could, browse, maybe play some games a little bit, it's a different situation where if mom and dad are both working from home online and 2, 3, 4 kids are needing to go to school online too, that can pose some challenges. So I always want to make sure that we've got those options that are out there. Jason, it looks like you want to click in there and bring up your point. If you would like. Oh, you can't. It says you can't talk. Okay, I'll read it then. It's unfortunate that federal broadband money can't be used in most of our small towns because, according to the federal rules, they have adequate internet. Those rules need to be updated to higher speeds, and they need to include price. When Ogallala can have 100 megs for $50 and Imperial had 10 megs for $70, but Imperial didn't qualify for federal funds because it had quote unquote adequate internet. Allo came to Imperial, so it's better now, but there are other areas that are in the same boat. And I hear what you're saying, and we will, like I said, always want to stay on top of that. And, it's been interesting. Broadband, I think, is part of our nation's infrastructure. Now, that doesn't mean it's funded the same way our highways, airports, and bridges are funded. But I think there's pretty much common interest that we want to make sure that this type of infrastructure, communications infrastructure, is out there and available, affordable, as you mentioned. And so filling in some of these gaps, we're going to have to get more creative. I think the first thing we want to do at the federal level is make sure we don't discourage investment from the private sector. And I think the federal government tends to end up discouraging investment even when they don't intend to. But we want to leverage that investment in a creative way so that we can have more capacity that's out there, affordability as well. So appreciate that. Anyone else?
I would just refer people who are interested in that. We've been doing some great work around broadband. We've produced a really great report called Disconnected, and my peer Jeremy Higley, who's in our Kansas City main bank, has been doing outreach, convening a lot of the nation or the state's broadband directors, or those that function in that equivalent, to address this issue, because we know it's a problem. It's not just a rural problem; it's an urban problem too. I've heard things like Jason referenced in terms of pricing for, 10 megs. Just to give you an example, I have a gig internet from CenturyLink for $60 a month for life here in North Omaha, Nebraska. And, people like Jason referenced are paying $70 for 10 megs, and then they can't get coverage projected out past their driveway. So I so appreciate that you said, Congressman, that it has to be part of our national infrastructure. Because right now, so imagine a community that needed to pivot to online strategy, like let's say like Janelle is suggesting, and had no access. So, and then it's also a quality of life issue. It's a population retention issue. It's a entrepreneurship issue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is something that we really need to pay attention to ensure that, all Nebraskans have adequate access to the internet, whatever we may consider that may be, as long as it's at a relatively decent price, regardless of how we get there. I think it's a Nebraska priority that we should have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've supported efforts asking the FCC for some funds to upgrade systems. And so that is that's something that I've done on my end, and also looking at mapping. We need to improve mapping. Right now, broadband is mapped actually by census tract. And so that is such a vast designation in a rural area that it's not useful. So we need more precision on that front as well, and at least in terms of the rural aspects. So anything else? I know we're kind of running out of time here. I really appreciate the discussion here this morning, and certainly everyone sharing their insight. If there are other questions or points that anyone wants to raise, please just let us know. I should note here that Josh Jackson out of my Washington office has been online on the call here the whole time, and also Jared out of my Grand Island office as well. Many of you see Jared out and around the district, so appreciate that. I also should note here that Sean Caskey notes that that UNK recently conducted a rural study relating to broadband. So I'll be anxious to learn more about that. Thanks, Sean, for bringing that up. And if you could get me in my office more information on that, that would be great. So fortunately, I'm glad I had the redundancy of my phone. And speaking of digital access, since my iPad wasn't working this morning, I'm glad I had my phone here. But I really appreciate everyone's participation. And like I said, if we can be of assistance, please let us know. And hopefully we can meet in person one of these days soon. So thanks again, and have a great day and a great week. Take care.